The sun was setting over the small village of Piedra Blanca, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The air hung heavy with the scent of cooking fires and the sweet fragrance of wildflowers that grew along the roadside. It was the kind of peaceful evening that normally brought neighbors together on their porches to share stories and laughter. But today was different. Today, silence blanketed the village like a thick fog. In the center of town stood a modest home with walls painted a faded blue. Candles flickered in the windows and a small crowd had gathered outside. Inside, the body of Maria Santos lay still, her weathered hands crossed over her chest. At 78 years old, Maria had been a pillar of the community for longer than most could remember. Her death had come suddenly, sending ripples of shock through the village. "She was fine just last week," whispered Anna, a middle-aged woman who lived next door. "She gave my son a remedy for his cough, and it worked like magic. How could she be gone so quickly?" Maria wasn't an ordinary villager. For decades, she had been known as the village healer, a woman whose knowledge of local plants and remedies often succeeded where modern medicine had failed. People came from neighboring villages seeking her help, carrying their sick children or describing mysterious ailments that doctors couldn't name. Maria's small home doubled as her workplace. The front room welcomed visitors, with its comfortable chairs and walls lined with jars of dried herbs. But the back rooms remained private, a mystery to most. Only her granddaughter Elena had been allowed to enter those spaces freely. "My grandmother always said that knowledge was power," Elena told the gathered mourners, her voice barely audible through her tears. "But she also said that some knowledge needs protection from those who would misuse it." At 23, Elena stood apart from the other villagers. Her university education in the city had given her a different perspective, yet she had always respected her grandmother's traditional ways. Now dressed in black, she accepted condolences with quiet dignity, though questions burned in her mind. 2 days before her death, Maria had called Elena home from university. The old woman had sounded anxious on the phone, something Elena had rarely heard in her grandmother's voice. "You must come home," Maria had insisted. "There are things I need to tell you, things you need to know before it's too late." But when Elena arrived, she found her grandmother too weak to speak clearly. Maria managed only to press a small iron key into Elena's palm before falling into a sleep from which she never awoke. The doctors from the nearest town called it heart failure. But Elena wasn't convinced. As the wake continued into the night, Elena noticed strange visitors among the mourners. A tall man in an expensive suit stood in the corner, observing everything but speaking to no one. He didn't belong to the village or any nearby community. When Elena approached him, he introduced himself as Reynaldo Vargas, a representative from Nueva Vida Pharmaceuticals. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Her knowledge of natural remedies was impressive. We had hoped to discuss a business opportunity with her." Elena felt a chill despite the warm evening. She never mentioned any pharmaceutical company. "We only recently reached out," Reynaldo replied with a thin smile. "Such a shame we didn't connect sooner. Please accept my condolences." He handed her a business card before slipping away into the night, leaving Elena with an uneasy feeling. She tucked the card into her pocket, making a mental note to look into this company later. As the mourners departed and night fully claimed the village, Elena remained alone in her grandmother's house. The silence felt oppressive, broken only by the occasional creaking of the old wooden structure. Sleep eluded her as questions swirled in her mind. What had her grandmother wanted to tell her? What was the key for? And why had a pharmaceutical representative traveled all this way for a village healer's funeral? Unable to rest, Elena lit a lantern and began exploring the house more thoroughly. The key her grandmother had given her must unlock something important. She tried it on various cabinets and drawers without success, until she noticed a small wooden chest tucked beneath her grandmother's bed. The key fit perfectly, turning with a satisfying click. Inside the chest, Elena found a leather-bound journal filled with her grandmother's neat handwriting. The pages contained detailed notes about plants, animals, and remedies, but the later entries focused on something different. something that made Elena's blood run cold. "I have perfected the method," Maria had written. "The venom extraction is now safe and consistent. The snakes and scorpions remain healthy, and the healing properties of the modified venom exceed all expectations. This could change everything, but I must be cautious. There are those who would use this knowledge for profit, not healing." The final entry, dated just 3 days before Maria's death, was more disturbing. "Someone has been watching the house. Items in my workroom have been moved. I fear they know what I've discovered. I must secure everything and tell Elena before they return." Elena closed the journal, her heart pounding. Her grandmother hadn't been paranoid. Someone had been interested in her work, interested enough to intrude on her private space. Had they gone further? Could they have been responsible for her sudden death? With the journal clutched to her chest, Elena moved through the house, seeing it with new eyes. She examined every corner, every cabinet, looking for more clues. In the kitchen, she noticed scratch marks around the edges of the old wooden floor, as if a section had been repeatedly moved. Kneeling down, Elena ran her fingers along the floor until she felt a slight depression. When she pressed it, a small section of floorboards shifted. With trembling hands, she lifted the hidden trapdoor, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness beneath the house. The funeral would be tomorrow. Elena knew she should rest, but the discovery left her restless. What secrets lay beneath? Her grandmother's house? And what connection did they have to Maria's unexpected death? As dawn approached, Elena made a decision. Before her grandmother was laid to rest, she would uncover the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. The morning of Maria Santos's funeral arrived with a heavy mist that clung to the hills surrounding Piedra Blanca. The village church bell tolled slowly, its deep sound rolling through the valley, calling everyone to pay their final respects. Elena hadn't slept. After discovering the hidden staircase beneath her grandmother's kitchen floor, she'd spent hours exploring a small underground room filled with glass terrariums. Each container housed different species of snakes or scorpions, all carefully labeled with scientific names and notes about their venom properties. The discovery was both fascinating and terrifying. She hadn't known the full extent of her grandmother's research, and now she wondered if it was connected to her sudden death. But there was no time to investigate further. The funeral was about to begin, and as Maria's only living relative, Elena needed to be present. She closed the trapdoor, making sure it was properly hidden, and hurried to change into her black dress. The church was already crowded when she arrived. Nearly everyone from Piedra Blanca had come, along with people from neighboring villages who had benefited from Maria's healing skills over the years. The simple wooden coffin sat at the front, adorned with wildflowers and candles. Father Luis, the village priest who had known Maria for over 40 years, stood solemnly by the altar. His lined face showed genuine grief. He and Maria had often worked together helping the sick, despite their occasionally different approaches to healing. "Maria Santos was a blessing to our community," Father Luis began. "Her knowledge of natural remedies saved many lives when doctors were too far away or treatments too expensive. Though some called her methods unconventional, none could deny the goodness in her heart and her desire to help others." As the priest spoke, Elena noticed Ronaldo Vargas slip into the back of the church. The pharmaceutical representative was not alone this time. A woman in a dark business suit stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the coffin with an intensity that made Elena uncomfortable. The service continued with villagers sharing stories of how Maria had helped them. Ana told of how Maria had cured her son's persistent fever when the hospital had given up hope. Old Pedro recounted how Maria's special ointment had healed a snake bite that should have taken his leg. "She always said that nature provides all the medicine we need, if only we learn to listen," Pedro said, wiping away tears with a weathered hand. When it was Elena's turn to speak, she stood with trembling legs but a steady voice. "My grandmother was more than just a healer," she said. "She was a scientist in her own way, constantly learning and experimenting to improve her remedies. She believed that traditional knowledge combined with careful study could create healing that respected both the body and the spirit." Elena caught Ronaldo's gaze from across the room. His expression remained neutral, but she noticed him lean over to whisper something to his colleague. After the service, 6 village men carried the coffin to the cemetery behind the church. The procession moved slowly under the midday sun, which had finally burned away the morning mist. The cemetery was small, surrounded by stone walls covered in flowering vines. Maria would rest beside her husband, who had passed away 15 years earlier. Father Luis led the final prayers as the coffin was lowered into the freshly dug grave. Elena stepped forward to toss a handful of dirt onto the coffin lid, an act that made Maria's death feel suddenly, painfully real. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks. "Goodbye, Abuela," she whispered. That's when it happened. The first sign was a soft, rustling sound, barely noticeable among the quiet sobs of the mourners. Then someone gasped. A small green snake. No longer. Then a pencil slithered across the freshly turned earth beside the grave. "Snake!" a woman cried out, jumping back. Before anyone could react, another appeared, emerging from beneath a nearby tombstone. Then another from the flowers placed around the grave. Within moments, the air was filled with panicked shouts as more small snakes appeared, seeming to come from all directions. "This is a bad omen!" shouted an old woman, crossing herself frantically. The panic worsened when the first scorpion was spotted. Its tail curved upward in a defensive position as it scuttled across the grave dirt. Then more appeared. 5, 10. Too many to count, their small bodies gleaming in the sunlight. People began to run, pushing past each other to get away from what many were already calling a curse. Father Luis tried to restore order, his voice drowned out by the screams and shouts. Children cried as parents scooped them up and fled. Elena stood frozen, her mind racing to make sense of the chaos. These weren't just any snakes and scorpions. She recognized several species from the terrariums beneath her grandmother's house. But how had they gotten here? The cemetery was a good distance from the house. Through the crowd, she spotted Ronaldo and his colleague. Unlike the terrified villagers, they weren't running. Instead, they watched the scene with calculated interest, almost as if they'd expected it. When Ronaldo noticed Elena observing them, he quickly turned away, pulling his companion toward the cemetery gate. As the crowd thinned, only Elena, Father, Luis, and the gravediggers remained, watching in disbelief as more creatures emerged from the surrounding ground and vegetation. One of the gravediggers swung his shovel, killing a snake that had come too close. "Don't!" Elena cried out, rushing forward. "Don't kill them!" The man looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "These are dangerous creatures, Elena. Look at them." "They were my grandmother's," she said, the realization dawning on her. "These are from her collection. Someone must have released them here deliberately." Father Luis approached cautiously, keeping his distance from the reptiles and arachnids. "What are you saying, child?" Elena looked around at the interrupted burial, the scattered mourners, and the creatures that had caused such fear. She thought of the hidden room, of her grandmother's journal entries about someone watching the house, and of Ronaldo Vargas's suspicious behavior. "I'm saying my grandmother didn't die of natural causes," she said quietly, "and I think whoever is responsible for her death just tried to destroy her life's work by releasing these creatures here, knowing they would either be killed or die in the open." Father Luis's eyes widened as he processed her words. In the distance, they could hear sirens approaching. Someone had called the authorities. "We need to collect as many as we can," Elena said urgently. "These aren't ordinary snakes and scorpions. They're special breeds my grandmother was studying for their medicinal properties. They're evidence." As the village erupted in chaos and speculation about cursed funerals and bad omens, Elena began the dangerous task of recapturing the creatures that represented her grandmother's secret legacy, and possibly the key to understanding her death. The day after the funeral chaos, Piedra Blanca buzzed with wild stories. By morning, the tale had grown to include venomous cobras the size of tree trunks and scorpions with glowing tails. Children were kept indoors, and several families had packed up to stay with relatives in nearby villages. Fear had taken root, and with it came superstition. "It's a curse on the Santos family," whispered the older villagers. Maria must have dabbled in dark magic. Elena heard these rumors as she walked through the village square, carrying a small wooden box. Inside were 3 snakes and 2 scorpions she had managed to capture before the authorities arrived yesterday. The rest had either been killed in the panic or taken away by animal control officials who had been called to the scene. Father Luis had helped her, despite his own fear. He now waited for her at the church, having agreed to keep her secret for the time being. Elena trusted him. He had been like family to her grandmother. "I've never seen anything like it," Father Luis said when she arrived, eyeing the box nervously. "In 40 years as a priest, I've heard of strange occurrences at funerals, but nothing like this." Elena placed the box carefully on a table in the church office. "These creatures were part of my grandmother's research. She was breeding them for their medicinal properties." "Breeding venomous creatures? For medicine?" The priest looked doubtful. "It sounds strange, I know, but look at this." Elena pulled her grandmother's journal from her bag and opened it to a page filled with detailed drawings and notes. She discovered that certain compounds in their venom, when properly extracted and modified, could treat diseases that modern medicine struggles with. Father Luis adjusted his glasses and peered at the journal. Maria always was ahead of her time. But why keep this secret? "Because of people like Reynaldo Vargas," Elena said, her voice hardening. "The pharmaceutical representative at the funeral. I did some research online last night. Nueva Vida Pharmaceuticals has a history of taking traditional remedies, patenting them, and selling them at prices the very communities they came from can't afford." The priest sighed. "That doesn't surprise me. But Elena, are you suggesting this company had something to do with your grandmother's death?" Before she could answer, the church door opened. Detective Paulo Mendez from the regional police stepped in, his weathered face serious beneath his official cap. Elena quickly closed the journal. "Miss Santos," he said with a polite nod. "Father, I hope I'm not interrupting?" "Not at all," Father Luis replied smoothly. "Elena and I were discussing yesterday's unfortunate events." Detective Mendez pulled out a small notebook. "That's precisely why I'm here. In 30 years of police work, I've never filed a report quite like this one. Snakes and scorpions appearing at a funeral. The health department is concerned about a possible infestation in the cemetery." "It wasn't an infestation," Elena said firmly. "Those creatures were deliberately released." The detective's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious claim. Do you have any proof?" Elena hesitated, looking at the wooden box on the table. Should she reveal what she knew? The detective followed her gaze. "What's in the box?" he asked. With a deep breath, Elena decided to trust him. She opened the lid slightly, allowing him to peek inside. The detective jumped back, his hand instinctively moving toward his hip where his gun was holstered. "These are from my grandmother's collection," Elena explained quickly. "She was researching their medicinal properties. I believe someone released them at the funeral to create chaos and destroy her work." Detective Mendez looked skeptical. "And who would do such a thing?" "I have my suspicions." Elena told him about Reynaldo Vargas and Nueva Vida Pharmaceuticals, about her grandmother's hidden laboratory, and about the final entries in her journal suggesting someone had been watching the house. "That's all very interesting," the detective said when she finished. "But it's circumstantial. Your grandmother was old, Miss Santos. The medical examiner found nothing suspicious. Sometimes elderly people simply pass away." Elena felt frustration building inside her. She was healthy just days before. And what about the creatures at the funeral? That wasn't natural. "I agree that part is strange," Detective Mendez conceded. "But it could have been a prank, or perhaps they were attracted to something in the area." Father Luis cleared his throat. "Detective, I've known Maria Santos for decades. She was not the type to keep dangerous creatures unless she had good reason. If Elena believes there's more to this story, I think we should listen." The detective sighed, closing his notebook. "I'll look into this pharmaceutical company, but I can't promise anything. In the meantime, those creatures should be turned over to proper authorities." After he left, Elena felt deflated. He doesn't believe me. Give him time, Father Luis said gently. In the meantime, we should continue your grandmother's work. If her research was valuable enough that someone might want to steal it, then it's worth protecting. Elena nodded, a plan already forming in her mind. I need to go back to the university. There's a professor there, Dr. Rivera, who specializes in toxicology. If anyone can help me understand my grandmother's research, it's her. That afternoon, Elena packed her bags and prepared to leave for the city. Before going, she returned to her grandmother's house to gather the journal and some samples from the underground lab. As she descended the hidden staircase, she noticed something troubling. Some of the terrariums had been disturbed since her last visit, their lids slightly askew. Someone had been here. Heart-pounding, Elena worked quickly, photographing her grandmother's notes and collecting venom samples stored in small vials in a locked refrigerator. As she worked, she heard a floorboard creak overhead. She wasn't alone in the house. Extinguishing her flashlight, Elena pressed herself against the wall in the darkness. Footsteps moved across the kitchen floor directly above her head. They paused, near the area of the trapdoor, and Elena held her breath. After what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps moved away, followed by the sound of the front door closing. Trembling with fear and adrenaline, Elena waited several minutes before risking the climb back up. When she finally emerged into the kitchen, nothing seemed out of place but an unfamiliar scent hung in the air. Expensive cologne. Looking through the window, she caught a glimpse of a dark car pulling away down the dusty road. Though she couldn't see the driver clearly, the vehicle matched the one Ronaldo Vargas had arrived in at the funeral. Elena's suspicions were hardening into certainty. Her grandmother's death, the funeral incident, and now this intrusion. They were all connected to her research. The pharmaceutical company wanted something, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to get it. As she boarded the bus to the city that evening, Elena clutched her backpack containing the precious research materials. She was no longer just grieving her grandmother. She was fighting to protect her legacy. And the first step was to understand exactly what Maria Santos had discovered that was worth killing for. The city was a stark contrast to Piedra Blanca. Tall buildings crowded the sky, and the constant noise of traffic replaced the gentle sounds of village life. Elena felt out of place as she made her way through the university campus, clutching her grandmother's journal and the carefully packed samples. Dr. Rivera's office was tucked away in the science building, surrounded by laboratories where students in white coats peered into microscopes and mixed chemicals in beakers. A nameplate on the door read, Dr. Lucia Rivera, Professor of Toxicology and Pharmacology. Elena knocked, her heart pounding. She had only met Dr. Rivera once before, when the professor had visited Piedra Blanca to study local medicinal plants. Her grandmother had spoken highly of the woman's brilliant mind and ethical approach to science. Come in, called a warm voice. Dr. Rivera looked up from her computer, recognition lighting her eyes. Elena Santos? This is unexpected. She rose to greet her visitor, then noticed Elena's somber expression. What's wrong? My grandmother died, Elena said simply, and I believe she was murdered. Over the next hour, Elena explained everything. The hidden laboratory, the funeral incident, the pharmaceutical representative, and her suspicions. Dr. Rivera listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. Show me the journal, she said when Elena finished. As Dr. Rivera carefully examined Maria's notes, her eyebrows rose higher and higher. This is remarkable. Your grandmother was onto something incredible here. What exactly? Elena asked. She was isolating compounds from snake and scorpion venom that could potentially treat chronic pain, heart disease, and even certain types of cancer, all without the addictive properties or side effects of current treatments. Dr. Rivera turned another page. And she found a way to harvest these compounds without harming the creatures, allowing for sustainable production. Is that valuable? Dr. Rivera laughed without humor. Valuable? Elena, this research could be worth billions. A non-addictive, pain treatment alone would revolutionize medicine. companies spend millions trying to develop what your grandmother seems to have discovered in her kitchen. The reality of the situation hit Elena like a physical blow. That's why Nueva Vida wants her research. They could patent these treatments and control who gets access to them. Exactly, and unfortunately, it wouldn't be the first time a pharmaceutical company has taken traditional knowledge and monetized it. Dr. Rivera closed the journal carefully. But you mentioned samples. Elena produced the small vials she had rescued from her grandmother's refrigerator. Dr. Rivera handled them with reverence, examining the clear liquid inside. I'll need to analyze these properly in the lab. It might take a few days. I don't have a few days, Elena said urgently. Someone broke into my grandmother's house yesterday. They're looking for her research. Dr. Rivera's expression hardened. Then we'll work through the night. Meanwhile, you should stay at my apartment. It's not safe for you to be in a hotel if these people are as determined as you say. That night, Elena couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. She lay on Dr. Rivera's couch, thinking about her grandmother and all the secrets she had kept. Why hadn't Maria shared more of her work? Was she trying to protect Elena, or had she simply not trusted her with the knowledge? Morning came with a breakthrough. Dr. Rivera burst into the apartment, her eyes bright with excitement despite her obvious fatigue. Your grandmother was a genius, she declared, placing a stack of lab reports on the coffee table. These compounds are unlike anything I've seen before. The way she modified the proteins in the venom to target specific pain receptors without affecting the nervous system, it's revolutionary. Elena felt a surge of pride. Can you reproduce her results? With time, yes. But there's something else you need to see. Dr. Rivera pulled out her tablet and showed Elena a news article. I did some digging into Nueva Vida Pharmaceuticals. The article detailed a lawsuit against the company for testing experimental drugs on villagers in remote areas without proper consent. The case had been settled out of court, with the company admitting no wrongdoing. There's more. Dr. Rivera swiped to another screen. Their CEO, Alberto Fuentes, has been pushing a bill that would make it easier for companies to patent naturally derived compounds without crediting or compensating indigenous communities. So they're not just after the money, Elena realized. They want to control the knowledge itself. Exactly. Dr. Rivera looked grim. And based on these lab results, I found something else troubling. Look at this analysis of the sample from your grandmother's blood test taken by the local doctor before her death. Elena examined the report, though the technical terms meant little to her. What am I looking at? Traces of a compound called tetrodotoxin. It's a powerful neurotoxin found in pufferfish and some species of newts. In small doses, it can cause symptoms similar to heart failure. It's nearly undetectable unless you're specifically looking for it. The implication hit Elena like a thunderbolt. She was poisoned. Dr. Rivera nodded solemnly. And not with any common poison. This is sophisticated, something only someone with advanced knowledge of toxicology would use. Like a pharmaceutical company, Elena whispered. We need to go to the police with this, Dr. Rivera said. This is evidence of murder. Elena thought of Detective Mendez and his dismissive attitude. The local police didn't believe me. We need more proof to connect Nueva Vida to my grandmother's death. Then we'll get it. Dr. Rivera's voice was determined. I have colleagues in the chemistry department who can analyze the soil samples from the cemetery. If those snakes and scorpions were deliberately released, there might be traces of pheromones or attractants used to lure them there. For the first time since her grandmother's death, Elena felt a spark of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. What can I do? You can help me recreate your grandmother's research notes in my lab. If we can understand exactly what she discovered, we'll know what Nueva Vida was after. They worked tirelessly for 3 days, sleeping in short shifts on cots in the laboratory. Elena learned more about biochemistry than she had in all her university courses combined. Together, they pieced together Maria's methodology and replicated her results. On the third day, as they were documenting their findings, Elena received a call from Father Luis. Elena. His voice was urgent. Someone broke into the church last night. The box with the creatures is gone. and your grandmother's house. It's been burned to the ground. Elena felt the phone slip from her fingers. Dr. Rivera caught it, quickly assessing the situation from the priest's continued explanation. "We need to go to the authorities now," she said after hanging up. "This has gone too far." "No," Elena said, a steely resolve forming within her. "First, we need to secure what's left of my grandmother's legacy. We need to finish documenting everything and put it somewhere safe, somewhere Nueva Vida can't reach it." Dr. Rivera hesitated, then nodded. "I have contacts at the National Science Foundation. They can help protect the research and make sure it benefits everyone, not just corporate interests." As they gathered their notes and samples, Elena thought about the hidden chamber beneath her grandmother's now destroyed home. All those years of careful work, the creature she had bred and studied, all gone. But the knowledge remained, preserved in the journal Elena had saved and in the samples they had analyzed. The dark truth had emerged, but with it came a responsibility. Elena was now the keeper of her grandmother's legacy, and she wouldn't let it be stolen or suppressed. Whatever Nueva Vida had planned, they hadn't counted on Maria Santos passing her strength and determination to her granddaughter. "They think they've destroyed everything," Elena said, placing the last vial into a secure container. "But they're wrong. My grandmother's work will continue, but this time the whole world will know about it." Rain poured down on Piedra Blanca as Elena and Dr. Rivera returned to the village. The charred remains of Maria's house stood like a black scar against the lush hillside. Yellow police tape surrounded the property, flapping in the wind like tattered flags. Detective Mendez met them at the police station, his expression far more serious than during their last encounter. The evidence from Dr. Rivera's lab had finally convinced him to take Elena's claims seriously. "We've been investigating Nueva Vida Pharmaceuticals," he said, gesturing for them to sit. "Their story isn't adding up. Reynaldo Vargas checked into the local hotel 3 days before your grandmother's death, but no one recalls seeing him in the village until after she died." Elena felt a cold satisfaction. "Have you arrested him?" The detective shook his head. "We can't find him. He checked out of the hotel yesterday and hasn't been seen since. But we've contacted the federal authorities. This goes beyond my jurisdiction now." "What about the company?" Dr. Rivera asked. "They're claiming Vargas was acting without their knowledge or approval," Detective Mendez replied. "According to them, he was only authorized to discuss a possible collaboration with your grandmother, not to steal research or harm anyone." Elena laughed bitterly. "They're making him the scapegoat." "Most likely," the detective agreed. "But that doesn't mean we can't build a case against the company, too. Dr. Rivera's analysis of the poison found in your grandmother's system is compelling evidence. We just need to connect it to Nueva Vida." The next morning, a surprising visitor arrived at Father Luis's house, where Elena was staying. A thin, nervous man in his 50s introduced himself as Carlos Diaz, a laboratory assistant at Nueva Vida Pharmaceuticals. "I can't be seen here," he said anxiously, glancing over his shoulder as Father Luis led him to the kitchen where Elena and Dr. Rivera were having breakfast. "But I had to come. What happened to your grandmother? It wasn't right." Elena studied him cautiously. "You knew my grandmother?" Carlos nodded. "Not personally, but I saw her research when Vargas brought it back to the lab 6 months ago." 6 months? Elena exchanged shocked glances with Dr. Rivera. "He stole her research before she died?" "He didn't steal it then," Carlos explained. "He photographed her notes during a visit when she stepped away to make tea. The company has been trying to replicate her results ever since without success. Something was missing from the notes, a key step in the process." Dr. Rivera leaned forward. "So they decided to take the complete research by force." Carlos looked down at his trembling hands. "Vargas was sent back with orders to get the full methodology, whatever it took. I didn't know he would. I never thought." His voice broke. "You have proof of this?" Detective Mendez asked, having been called to join them. Nodding, Carlos pulled a USB drive from his pocket. "Email exchanges between Vargas and the CEO, laboratory logs, and this." He placed a small vial on the table. The same compound found in Maria Santos's system. It was developed in our lab for field research purposes. The evidence was damning. Within hours, federal agents had raided Nueva Vida's headquarters, seizing computers and documents. Vargas was apprehended trying to cross the border. The company's CEO and several executives were taken in for questioning, but Elena found little joy in these developments. Her grandmother was still gone, and the house that held generations of family memories was destroyed. The creatures her grandmother had so carefully bred and studied were either dead or scattered. 2 weeks later, Elena stood before the rebuilt door of the underground chamber. The fire had damaged the house above, but the hidden laboratory remained largely intact, protected by thick stone walls and earth. With Father Luis's help, Elena had begun the delicate work of recapturing the surviving snakes and scorpions that had returned to their home. "Your grandmother would be proud," Father Luis said, watching as Elena carefully transferred a small golden scorpion into a new terrarium. "You've honored her legacy." Elena smiled sadly. "I wish I had known more about her work while she was alive. We could have shared so much." "She was protecting you," the priest reminded her gently, "and now you are protecting her work." Indeed, Elena had made sure her grandmother's research would benefit everyone. With Dr. Rivera's help, she had established the Maria Santos Foundation, dedicated to studying traditional medicine and ensuring that any treatments developed would be accessible to all communities, especially those like Piedra Blanca that had preserved such knowledge for generations. The Foundation's first major project was already underway, a medical research center built on the site of Maria's house, where scientists would work alongside traditional healers to develop new treatments. The center would include a garden of medicinal plants and a special facility for breeding and studying the unique snake and scorpion species Maria had worked with. "We received the patent approval today," Dr. Rivera announced, joining them in the underground lab. "Maria's method for extracting and modifying the venom compounds is now officially recognized as her invention. Any company wanting to use it will have to work with the Foundation and follow our ethical guidelines." It was a victory, but for Elena, the greatest triumph came a month later, when the first patient was treated with her grandmother's formula. A young girl from a neighboring village, suffering from a rare form of chronic pain that conventional medicine couldn't touch. The treatment worked where all else had failed, just as Maria had predicted. Word spread quickly. Soon, medical professionals from around the country were visiting the center, learning about Maria's methods and the vision behind them. What had begun as a secret in a hidden chamber was now changing lives openly. On the first anniversary of her grandmother's death, Elena returned to the cemetery alone. The grave was no longer a place of fear and chaos, but peaceful, covered with wildflowers. Elena placed a small wooden box on the headstone and opened it carefully. Inside, a tiny green snake, one of the offspring from her grandmother's collection, raised its head curiously. "Look what we did, Abuela," Elena whispered, watching as the snake slithered onto the sun-warmed stone. "Your work lives on. Those who tried to steal it are facing justice, and the people you always wanted to help are being helped." The snake basked in the sunlight for a moment before retreating back to the box. Elena closed it gently. She would release this one in the special habitat behind the research center, where all of Maria's carefully bred creatures now lived, protected and studied with respect. As Elena walked back through the village, she passed children playing without fear, families going about their daily lives, and visitors coming to learn at the new center. The tragedy that had begun with snakes and scorpions at a funeral had transformed into something beautiful, a legacy of healing and knowledge that would benefit generations to come. Maria Santos's story hadn't ended at her funeral. In many ways, it had just begun.